Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Giovannini, and I'm currently studying to be a 3D character artist for video games. So what you're currently seeing here is a piece I just completed as a part of a class over at CGMA. This is a real-time hair study being rendered in Unreal Engine 4. So what I'm going to go over today is basically how I created the base texture maps that utilize the shader here in Unreal Engine. And if I bring up the UI here, we have the shader here in the lower left corner that I'm using. And basically, you can get the shader from the Unreal launcher. It's part of this photorealistic character project that you can load up yourself under the Learn section. And it provides eyes, skin, and hair shaders that you can use. So with that, I'm going to load up the shader editor window here. And as you can see, there's a lot of different attributes, values you can change, etc. I'm not really going to go over this today. There's a lot of stuff you can mess with here. This is the color, and you can use it to mess with hair color and stuff, but I'm basically just going to go over how to make these 4 textures which you need to make use of this shader. This is what you need to provide yourself, and this is what I was asked about specifically. So I've got the my textures here loaded up in Photoshop so we can take a better look at them. So this is the alpha and the height, hair ID, and hair ramp. So hair alpha here basically just governs the transparency of the hair, and the hair height is is for the pixel depth offset portion of the shader. It gives it depth. This is the hair ID, which lets you add randomness to the individual hair color of individual hairs to get more breakup. And the hair ramp again is for color and other aspects of the shader. It's a little bit above me. I'm not too entirely sure how it's utilized 100%, but it is necessary. So yeah, these are the 4 shaders that we're going to create today. I'm going to show you how to make. Also, just really quick, before we get too deep into it, I do need to give credit to where I learned this from this hair creation for games class over at the CG Masters Academy. From this gentleman, Johan Lithfall. He's an extremely good teacher. I've taken a lot of classes with CGMA and other places, and he's honestly he's new at teaching, but he's also one of the best teachers I've had. He goes really in depth. He tries really hard. He's very organized. He is very good. And if you really want to learn how to make a nice hair asset, because I'm not going to go into everything. I'm going to go into really basic how to just create the textures, and there's so much more to it. This is a really in-depth 8-week course. And if you really want to learn it, this is where you need to go. Honestly, you need to learn it from someone who's an expert like this guy. So, you can see everything here that you're going to go over. It's a lot to it. And also, before we jump in, I do want to share how these textures are utilized, how they're put together for the final asset creation, and how there's a lot more to it than just baking out the textures. This happens after the texture baking process. Basically, you have these single hair cards. I combine them into hair clumps, which are these triangles, as you can see. You just take the single hair cards and put them together. And it's just a process of taking these and then applying them one at a time to your base mesh. It is sort of built up in layers, so if I turn off my other layers here, you can see I have my base layer, which is how you kind of get general idea. You add breakup layers and a third layer. And so it just breaks it down. You learn all this from that class. I'm not going to go into it today, but this is just generally just going over everything that goes into it beyond just baking out the textures. You just, you take these individual hair clumps and you duplicate them, and you just want to manipulate them into place one at a time. It's just extremely time consuming, but that's just how it's done. Use deformers and stuff, but again, I can really go into it. But yeah, we'll move on now to the next part. So here we are in a new Maya scene. So you are going to need a way to get to this point, to where you have these individual hair strands as geometry. These are all generated from XGen, and they're split into 5 separate groups, basically. They're all kind of randomly selected, and this, it's necessary to create the hair ID map. That's the only reason you have the 5 random groups. So assuming you can get to this point on your own, I'm sure there's plenty of tutorials on how to use XGen and generate hair geometry from it. You are going to, like I said, split these up to 5 groups, which you can see here in my outliner on the left. I have high poly, ID 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this is basically done with a script, a random select script. I'll link it in the description for you guys. It's just a free thing you can find online. I'll probably also link the geometry, the script I used to create the geometry from the hair splines, because basically XGen can give you hair splines, individual hair splines, and you can convert those to geometry, etc. Blah blah blah. But here, let me load up the script I'll give you guys. Bear with me. So it took a minute, so I paused it. So here we all have all the hairs are now separated into individual hairs now. And so what you'll need to do is you'll select all of these and you'll load up this script, which I need to load up the window for you guys here into the video. There we go. It's kind of huge, but this is what the window looks like. And with all your hairs selected, you just pick a percentage of random hairs you want to select out of everything you have selected. And so there you go. See, you hit the select button with 20%. I messed it up. Hold on. There you go. So you can see it selects basically random 20% of the hairs. And you just have to use this and make 5 evenly distributed random groups of hairs. This is necessary for the process. So, assuming you're at this point, you have your 5 groups and everything, you want to save all of these groups out as their own individual OBJ files. So you'll have 5 OBJs of high poly hairs for X normal baking. And that's what we're going to utilize to start making our textures. So another thing you need to do before we even jump into X normal is you'll need to use a program like Photoshop or Paint. It doesn't matter, but you need to create these base textures for your high poly. And you'll need a 25% gray, 50% gray, 75% gray. You'll need a black. You'll need a ramp, a gradient. And we utilize 2, so we can kind of customize it a bit with a more crunched black to get more natural kind of root to tip color. But I'm not going to go over that in this. And then a white. So basically, yeah, just these, the ramp and the white, and you'll be good to go. Also, before I forget, you're going to need to create these 2 planes here. And these are necessary for a low poly to bake onto to create your texture maps. You'll need your base and to bake onto, and you'll need a cage. I'm not going to go over how cages work and everything, but you need both of these basically. Otherwise, it won't work. So these will each be saved out as their own individual OBJs. So you'll need 2 OBJs, 1 for each plane, a base and a cage for the base. So now we're finally in XNormal. So now we can get down to the nitty-gritty stuff and the whole point of this tutorial. Let me delete this so we can start from scratch. So some of these submenus are not going to show up in the video, but you should still be able to get the gist of it. So you want to load up your, in the high poly, you might want to load up the 5 groups. So I got this window loaded for you at least. So I'm going to load up the 5 high poly OBJs. These are the 5 hair groups that you should have made, randomly selected. And so those will be in our HD high definition meshes tab. So there's nothing else to really mess with here in terms of settings, but we do need to load up, starting with those base textures that I told you to make 2 before starting this. So for the alpha, we're just going to start by loading the white base texture for all of these. And again, sorry you can't see it, but it's pretty straightforward. You just you'll right click it and say choose base texture to bake, and just pick the white one for each of these. So bear with me for a moment while I get these all loaded in for all 5 of these groups. This is what you're going to be doing as well. So I guess if you highlight all of them, you can load them all at the same time. Just pick your white. So once we have that all set up, we need to do our low poly now. And similar process, but this time we're going to load that base plane we saved out. And then you also need to load the external cage file. Oh, I chose the wrong option. Need to delete. I loaded the cage as a second mesh. Okay. So you need to choose load external cage in the right click menu, which you cannot see in the video, but you'll see it there. XNormal is pretty easy to use. You'll figure it out. So yeah, there you go. Your cage should be in the external cage file column right there. That's the top plane, the one above the hair. This is the one on the bottom, the base. So for all of these, we're going to be using base, only the baked base texture. Like that's the only option we're going to use except for the depth. So the depth's going to be different, but for the other three, we're just using big base texture for all of these. And for alpha, we want to turn our edge padding down to 0 because we don't want any padding for the alpha. Otherwise, it's going to make it look ugly. We can use anti-aliasing, I guess. But yeah, that's all we need to do for now. Just hit generate map, and we should get our alpha map here in a second. Let me see if I can load this window for you here. Okay, so we're going to start baking. So I ended up pausing it because obviously it takes time, so it took over a minute. And we have our alpha texture here. So that's all done. Pretty easy. We have our alpha texture all baked out, as you can see. So there we go. Let's just rinse and repeat. So now we're going to do the next one. Okay, so for the next texture, we want to go back to our high definition meshes. And basically, we're going to start loading up those different values of gray to start creating our ID map into each of these different groups. So I'm going to start by loading the first one here. We need to leave one of them as white. So I'm leaving the first one as white. And I'm going to choose 25% for the second one. I want to clarify, it doesn't really matter where you put each one because it's all random anyways, but they all need a different value for this ID map to work. So 25, 50, 75, and then we'll load black for the last one. So for this one, we can turn baking, or edge padding, back up to 16. And you can go ahead and rename it. So we're baking the ID map. We're still using bake base texture again. That's not changing. And then you're good. This should give us our ID map now. Oh yeah, time skip again. It took about a minute and a half, but there you go. That's the ID map for you. Pretty straightforward again. And so this should work as your ID map for Unreal and the hair shader in there. So now we're gonna start doing the third texture. And for this one, we're gonna load the gradient into all of them. So again, you can just shift click all of them and load all of them at the same time. And we're only going to do this once for demonstration, but you can do it twice with the more crest black version and the more even version. And basically you can multiply the crest black version over the more even one and adjust how you want that ramp fall off to go, basically. So you can get maybe a more natural, because this ramp is used for the root to tip color variation in the shader. And so you can use that to kind of adjust it. So, we'll just rename it here again to ramp. And just start generate maps, same rinse and repeat. Pretty easy stuff once you get all the earlier stuff done. While that's baking out, I did want to clarify one thing about the UVs here for the actual high poly hair strands. The script I'm going to provide for you should generate these UVs automatically from if you do the whole XGen process of creating splines and everything. It should create these UVs for you on its own, but this is what the UVs look like for the hair strands. This is how it needs to be, I guess, for this whole process to work. I forgot to mention this earlier, so I just want to clarify this. Hopefully you don't miss this part. But I just wanted to make sure you knew that your individual hair strands all need this kind of UV map on it for it to work. So here we go. We have our ramp. There it is, from root to tip. So last but not least, we need to create our depth map. And for this one, we're going to be using the height map option, no longer the baked base texture. The textures don't matter anymore. We don't need that. We're just using height. And this is the last step, really. So you're going to need to bake out a few of these. So I'm only going to do one for demonstration, but I'll explain it here in a minute once this is finished baking. So I skipped forward. So basically, once it gets to the end of the baking process, this window should open up automatically. It's height map tone mapper. You're going to need to adjust this separately, which is why I said you need to bake the height map a few times, the depth map a few times, because you need to make adjustments to this tone mapper settings for the different clumps. So like you'll need to make settings for like these two. You need to pick a couple clumps to focus on and just focus on getting a nice depth for specifically these two here. And what settings work for these two might not necessarily be great for like the other ones. Like these on the left, like this one on the far left, is kind of flat looking with these settings, but it works well for these ones. So you need to kind of bake this out a few times and then just like separate them and then recombine them in Photoshop or something in order to get a final height map that works well for all of the hair clumps or hair cards that we're baking out. So hopefully you've gotten the gist of all of this, and if you did, then you should have all four hair textures that you need for the Unreal Hair Shader. It's not too complicated. It's pretty straightforward if you can get to the point where you have the hair geometry. So here's our, you can see this is our depth map, and you'll need to do this a few times to correct it. Like I just did it the one, but you can see the ones on the left don't look very good. So that's why you need to do it a few times. The ID map here looks pretty good. Here's our ramp, and again, our alpha, perfect. So that's everything. So I hope this was really helpful for you. That's pretty much the gist of it. If you have any more questions, just let me know in the comments or on my ArtStation page. Thanks.